Hello everyone, it's Magic here. So I just got a new iPhone 14 Pro, and since I'm a professional photographer shooting weddings for the last 10 years, I decided to test it out in my kind of scenario. I love shooting iPhone photos, so I went for a couple shoot. And I shot, those 48 megapixels RAWs. I shot portraits, and then I compared this to my regular system, which is Sony A7IV and, a G Master lenses. So here are my observations. First of all, let's talk RAW files in iPhone 14 Pro. So whenever you switch and start shooting RAW files in iPhone, whatever you see on the screen, it's not actually a RAW file. So what you will see is going to be the software enhanced image looking really good already on your phone. But then when you take that RAW file and import it to a program like Lightroom on your desktop computer, for example, you might be surprised because the photo will look like way underexposed in specifically if you're shooting more difficult lighting scenarios. And what actually the iPhone is doing, it seems to be exposing for the sky, so to retain all the details in the sky. That will keep all the image very dark. But what is actually quite impressive is that when you push the exposure plus 3 stops, and particularly in this image, it will just bring back all the details from the couple, from their faces, and it actually does that pretty good. I'd say it's even better than the Canon RAW files that I used to shoot back in the days. You couldn't go above +1 exposure. Here you go +3, and there's no visible noise or anything in the image. It looks really good. Okay, but here comes the tricky part. So let's say you shoot RAW, you shot this RAW file. So there's these 3 photos, and then you want to edit this photo in some sort of an app. When you load it to the Snapseed, it knows that, oh, you're doing the RAW file, and you start actually seeing that your starting point is that underexposed photo. So now you have to work your ass off in the editing to get to the kind of a base point what iPhone created when you took a photo, meaning that if you want to use those 48 megapixels of beauty, crisp, beautiful image, you need to start from scratch. So if you don't know anything about editing, it might be really painful. Unless, and there's a little workaround that I found, playing around with those RAW files. So if you take your RAW file, and if you edit the file in the, photo app itself, so if you just click on the edit and you just change the smallest thing, let's say you just bring up the warmth a little bit in that image, and then you try to import that image to Snapseed, you will import a sort of a 48 megapixel file. I'm guessing it's not a RAW file anymore, but still you get to edit from the base point what iPhone created, and then you can apply your preset or whatever it is and get the very nice 48 megapixel crystal clear, crisp, beautiful image. So that's the way, at least for me, to get nice looking edited photo, 48 megapixels, so full photo on your phone. Just a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, which is Narrative Select, which is my go-to tool to cull my images. So first of all, it's free. So you just can go and download it right now. You can use it up to 6 projects a month for free. But also, it's amazing. Yeah, just look at this. Look at this group shot of what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, blah, blah, blah. I can count that fast, but it's a bunch of people, and I can immediately see all their faces and just decide, okay, this is good or bad. And since I took a whole bunch of photos of this group because I knew probably someone's gonna have their eyes closed, I just can quickly go through or even, filter out the photos that Narrative told me these are straight out bad, eyes closed, people not sharp. So yeah, 100% recommend Narrative Select if you're a wedding photographer culling tons of images every week. Okay, back to the video. Okay, the next point. Let's continue the JPEG and the RAW conversation because that's quite interesting here since we got this 48 megapixels of RAW files, but if you take JPEG files, there are 12 megapixel. So if you shoot the same photo in RAW versus JPEG in iPhone, Again, they're going to look very similar in the photos up, but due to that 48 megapixels, when you zoom in, you will see that it will look like way cleaner in the RAW format. So on the JPEG, you will see that compression noise. So, you don't get that extra sharpness that you can enjoy when shooting the RAW file. But then again, comparing these two files to each other, the RAW file is like a 55 megabytes of size, while the JPEG is just 2. So there's like a huge difference, and JPEG is ready already. So you just don't get that extra sharpness and the clear, crisp image. But keep in mind that like all of it that I just said like only applies to that main camera. Okay, the next point. This might be obvious to some of you, for some maybe not, but you cannot shoot RAW when you use portrait mode. And this brings me to a couple of comparison photos of my Sony A7IV with the iPhone 14 Pro. So let's take a look at photos taken with 24mm lens on both Sony and iPhone. So on Sony, I used 24mm f1.4 G Master. I started with this quite challenging shot, to be honest. That was not a good start for the iPhone, so I took that photo of a couple under a tree backlit. So looking at the RAW file from iPhone is just way underexposed, still very impressive. You can just bring that all up and they will just light up and look really good. Like you'll see the details and everything on their faces, and yeah, it looks really good compared to the raw file. And you get to see a quite lot of details in that iPhone shot, but even though it's a 48 megapixel file and I'm comparing it with A7IV, which has less megapixels because only 33 megapixels, the Sony photo has just way more details and just look overall like better in this particular example. And then what you will definitely see is going to be the difference in the background blur. So 24mm f1.4 on a full frame camera like I use just gives you that nice background blur if you are close to the couple, while iPhone with just like tiny sensor will just get everything. It's like quite sharp, so you don't get that that nice professional, let's say a portrait look. If we look at the less challenging photo, so let's say this one, again, underexposed heavily on iPhone, as you can see, but after I bring it up, I'm actually quite surprised how well the image holds up versus Sony RAW file. Look at the details. On both photos, the details are there, like maybe slightly more on the Sony side, but yeah, colors are there, and with a little bit of work, you'll get almost everything other than a background blur. But here the next point. In addition to the RAW photos I shot here on iPhone, I also shot a portrait photos from the very same scene. So switching to portrait, I'm forced to shoot JPEG, like HEIF actually image, and this is 12 megapixel file. So this is not 48 megapixels anymore, it's a 12 megapixel files. But what you see here is that the image just looks so good in terms of being ready. You have colors, you have the sky, you have nicely exposed main subjects, and also you get quite amazing background blur, to be honest, generated by the brain of iPhone, like computer generated background blur. So like look at the comparison between that portrait photo and the actual camera A7IV with 24-1.4 photo. It is quite impressive. You do lose the details now. So when you zoom in right now, you kind of see that little compression that I talked about before. So when you switch to JPEG, you just lose that extra sharpness, that extra details on the iPhone. But what you get that fake background blur that looks pretty cool to me, to be honest. But then zooming out, if you just look at the small photos, so whatever you would publish on social media, like the difference is not that significant. So, the two images started to blend, to be honest, and now you have to do additional work on the Sony file to bring back the sky, to make it look even in terms of lighting and, to add the vibrance and so on, which with iPhone portrait mode, you just get right away after you click a button. Okay, the next point is using a 50mm lens, so 2x zoom on iPhone 14 Pro, which is a new thing here as well. And I love it. I'm a fan of a 50mm lens. To be honest, I would love to have a main camera being, a 50mm or maybe 35mm, not 24. I know it's not popular opinion, but I'm a fan of a 50mm lens, so I'm happy to see that now on iPhone. So there's no visual difference if you shoot a 2x photo in RAW and JPEG. Look again. So this is on the left, you see the RAW 2x photo on iPhone, and on the right, you see the JPEG 2x photo on iPhone. You can zoom them in. You know, they look identical in terms of details. So I don't see much sense of using the RAW files anymore now. So I'll just stick to the portrait mode, which will give you the ability to just change the blur in the image and make it look, you know, more professional, let's say, like a professional portrait. So let's take a look at the photo. So first one was shot with Sony. Looks beautiful, you know, like you have that nice background blur. I shot it at 50mm f1.2, so very, you know, shallow depth of field. And then I shot a default portrait on iPhone. And the background blur was not there yet, so I went back to my iPhone, I edited the image, and I changed the f aperture, which you can do after you take the photo, which is insane, and moved it to f1.4, so closer to the f1.2 that I have on my Sony, and I'm impressed. It looks great. Look at this image. Like, looking at them side by side, both look really great, and iPhone holds up pretty well. Again, zooming in, you don't have these details anymore. You know, you might see some weird things happening somewhere in the hair when you have like the separation between the main subject and the background. But still, you know, for like social media purposes and just posting on the go, even little prints, it will just look great, and it just looks just as a professional 50mm f1.2 shot. That fake blur is like freaking impressive, to be honest, and you will see it even more on the next photo. So this one, when you have the foreground and background, you know, blurring. And also I did the edit afterwards. So first one is the default portrait photo, and the second one is moved to f1.4, and now compared to Sony A7IV here. So you can see how well the iPhone photo looks here. So is it worth shooting RAW files on your brand new iPhone 14 Pro? Oh man, that's a tough call actually. As a professional photographer, I've shot tens of thousands of photos on my iPhones every year. Like, this is my go-to camera. We print them at home. We use them on social media. So like, I love iPhone photos. And my take is that I don't think it is worth shooting RAW files, at least not all the time. So when shooting portraits of people, when shooting, you know, everyday life photos, so stuff that I use my iPhone for, like, you don't need that extra details, you don't need that extra sharpness, you don't need 48 megapixels in general. What you actually need a nicer look. You want it to look, at least I want it to look like more like my regular cameras. So if I just snap a quick photo of my kids, you know, playing around, I want it to have a nice background blur. So I definitely prefer shooting a portrait mode, and that would be my recommendation. Go with JPEGs, go with portrait mode, and especially that you can just move that blur, you know, back and forth in post later on. But if you find yourself in, like, let's say a landscape situation, so let's say you're looking at a cool lake or a mountain or even a nice, you know, city, you just want to take a photo of a place that looks good, I'd say use RAW file, because even if you're not planning to edit that file later on, it will look way better on your iPhone already, and you have just more to work with. So that's my take. I just geeked out a little bit on these images. If you want to watch some videos of me maybe editing my photos, you can just see it here. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video, and see you guys in the next one. Ciao.